People like you don't belong in first class." The words cut through the cabin like a blade, sharp and deliberate, dripping with entitlement and quiet venom. Elizabeth Warrington didn't even look up from her designer handbag as she shifted in seat 1B, the seat that didn't belong to her, the seat printed clearly on Marcus Bennett's boarding pass. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't. And hit like so more people can hear this story. Marcus Bennett had spent years flying around the world, but nothing prepared him for what unfolded that afternoon on Delta Airlines, Flight 927 from Atlanta to San Francisco. To everyone else in the cabin, he looked like any other tired traveler heading home after a long week. Navy sweater, dark slacks, well-worn shoes. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. But Marcus was not just another passenger. At 38 years old, he was the CEO of Nexus Tech, a company quietly controlling 70% of Delta Airlines itself. He carried more authority than anyone on that plane, more power than even the captain in the cockpit. Yet, in that moment, none of it mattered, because Elizabeth saw only one thing when she looked at him: his skin color. Marcus walked confidently down the jet bridge, already picturing himself back in Oakland with his 16-year-old daughter Amara. But the moment he reached row 1, he stopped cold. Seat 1B, his seat, was occupied by a blonde woman in her early 50s, pearl necklace shining under the cabin lights, scrolling casually through luxury real estate listings on her phone as if the entire cabin belonged to her. Marcus leaned slightly forward, calm and polite, and said evenly, "Excuse me, ma'am, I believe you're in my seat." Slowly, Elizabeth raised her head, her blue eyes scanning him from top to bottom, her gaze settling on his navy sweater, his dark skin, his simple watch. And then she smiled. But it wasn't the kind of smile meant to welcome. It was the kind that dismisses you without a word. Then, in a voice dripping with condescension, she said it again, louder this time so the entire first-class cabin could hear. "People like you don't belong in first class." Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, some stealing glances, others pretending not to hear. A young journalism student named Jada Carter, sitting 2 rows back, instinctively pulled out her phone and hit record. Marcus inhaled slowly, steadying himself, his face unreadable though his heart pounded with memories of every insult he had endured growing up, every time someone assumed his success was unearned. "My boarding pass says 1B, he said firmly, holding it up. "That is my seat." Elizabeth tilted her head and let out a soft laugh, sharp as broken glass. "This seat is reserved for Delta's highest-tier passengers," she said, voice low but laced with venom. "Real members, not system manipulators." The word manipulators hung in the air, heavy, coded, ugly, at that moment. Flight attendant Kayla Morgan stepped in, a petite woman in her early 30s with perfectly tied-back hair and a polished Navy uniform. Kayla smiled tightly and said, "Sir, if you wouldn't mind, we can find you another seat, just to keep things moving smoothly." Marcus turned his gaze toward her, his voice calm but unshaken. "No, I booked this seat. I will be sitting here." Kayla hesitated, glancing at Elizabeth, then back at Marcus, the weight of corporate policies pressing down on her. Seconds later, Captain Daniel Torres himself emerged from the cockpit, a seasoned pilot in his mid-50s with graying temples and a steady voice meant to soothe. But his words did not soothe. "Sir," he said carefully, "Mrs. Warrington is one of our most exclusive Delta VIPs. Perhaps we can accommodate you elsewhere. Maybe 3A, just a few rows back." A murmur rippled through the cabin, disbelief spreading among the passengers. Jada's live stream ticked past 200 viewers as comments flooded in. "Why is he being asked to move? This is disgusting. Stay strong. Man, Sofia Alvarez." An investigative journalist sitting in 2C leaned forward, pulling out her notepad, sensing a story unfolding right in front of her. Marcus's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed measured, controlled, dignified, with respect. "Captain, my ticket says 1B. I will not move," Elizabeth scoffed audibly, tossing her phone into her lap. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising. "People like me pay for these privileges. People like him take advantage of the system. It's obvious." That single word, obvious, landed like a hammer for Marcus. The entire cabin fell silent, for everyone watching. Tension climbed with each passing second. Jada's live stream ticked past 500 viewers, chat scrolling so fast it blurred. Kayla shifted uncomfortably, realizing the situation was spiraling. Marcus took one deep breath, reached into his leather bag, and calmly pulled out his phone, without raising his voice, without a single note of anger. He opened the Nexus Tech CEO Override app, a tool designed for emergencies, giving him direct operational control over Delta flights, and tapped a single command. The entire cabin shook, not from turbulence, but from shock, as Marcus looked directly at Captain Torres and said, "Ground this plane. Now." The captain blinked, confused, then glanced at Kayla, who stared back in stunned silence. "Sir, you can't just—" "I can," Marcus interrupted softly, but firmly. "And I just did. In seconds." Alerts pinged across Delta's control network. Jada's livestream exploded past 1,000 viewers, comments screaming, "What just happened?" Elizabeth's face drained of color, confusion breaking through her arrogance. For the first time since the confrontation began, she leaned back slightly, clutching her handbag, realizing she was no longer dealing with just another passenger. Marcus slid his phone back into his bag, folded his boarding pass neatly, and said in a steady voice everyone could hear, "I am Marcus Bennett, CEO of Nexus Tech, the company that owns 70% of this airline. I booked seat 1B, and I will be sitting here." Gasps erupted. Sophia dropped her pen. Kayla's face turned pale. Even Captain Torres froze, the weight of Marcus's words sinking in, and somewhere deep in the cabin, a passenger whispered, almost in awe, "He owns the airline." The cabin had fallen into a heavy silence, but beneath the surface, the tension was boiling. Elizabeth Warrington sat stiffly in Marcus Bennett's seat, her chin raised high, clinging to an arrogance she thought would shield her, but her grip on control was already slipping. Marcus remained standing, steady as stone, his expression calm, his presence commanding, while around him whispers rippled through the rows like sparks searching for fuel. Kayla Morgan, the lead flight attendant, swallowed hard, her training screaming at her to de-escalate. But deep down, her instincts battled with the reality unfolding in front of her. Jada Carter's livestream had jumped from a few hundred viewers to over 4,000 in less than 3 minutes. The live chat scrolling so quickly it was impossible to read every comment. Hashtags like Delta discrimination and Seat 1B had already begun trending, and the world outside the cabin was starting to watch. Kayla took a half-step closer, lowering her voice but not her authority. "Mr. Bennett," she said carefully, choosing her words with precision. "We're just trying to avoid a scene here. If you would take Seat 3A, we can resolve this quietly and take off on time." Marcus's dark eyes locked on hers, unblinking, his tone deliberate, each word measured. "Kayla," he said evenly, "you are asking the paying passenger with a confirmed seat to move so that someone without a rightful claim can stay. That's not avoiding a scene. That's creating one." Elizabeth let out an exaggerated sigh, tossing her phone back into her handbag and muttering just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Unbelievable. People like this always play the victim card. The sentence hung in the air, poisonous, and a wave of gasps rippled through first class. A young black couple seated near the aisle exchanged uneasy glances, their hands tightening around each other's as if they'd heard these words before, in other places, in other ways. Sofia Alvarez, the investigative journalist seated in 2C, leaned forward, her pen flying across her notebook, already sensing this was no longer just a personal dispute. This was a story about power, privilege, and public accountability. Captain Daniel Torres returned from the cockpit, his voice low but carrying authority hardened by 25 years in the air. "Mr. Bennett," he began, nodding once. "I understand this is frustrating, but Mrs. Warrington is one of our highest-tier Delta 360-degree members. We need to keep our VIP relationships in mind, so I'm asking you, respectfully, to take another seat." Jada's camera caught Marcus's face as he turned slowly toward the captain, his jaw tightening, though his voice remained calm and controlled. "Captain Torres," he said softly but firmly, "you are prioritizing her status over my rights as a passenger. Do you not see the problem here?" Torres hesitated, caught between company policies and the reality spiraling before him. Elizabeth pounced on his silence, her voice rising so everyone could hear. "Exactly. Captain, some of us actually belong here. We pay for these privileges. People like him, they take advantage of the system." A collective murmur broke through the cabin. Disbelief, outrage, discomfort, as if everyone felt the weight of her words but only a few dared to react. Jada's live-stream chat exploded. "This is racism. Plain and simple. Stay strong. Marcus, we see you. Man, this is going viral now. In the span of minutes, the view count shot past 10,000. Comments flooded TikTok and X simultaneously as influencers clipped the live stream and reshared it with captions demanding accountability. Kayla glanced nervously at her tablet, where alerts from Delta's internal communications system started pinging. Headquarters was watching now, but she still clung to procedure, hoping somehow she could make this go away quietly. "Mr. Bennett," she tried again, forcing a tight smile. "I'm sure we can offer you compensation for the inconvenience if you'd allow Mrs. Warrington to remain seated." That was the moment Marcus's composure shifted. Just slightly. A new edge sharpening his voice. "Compensation," he repeated, his tone calm but laced with steel. "You're asking the CEO of the company that owns 70% of this airline to move, and now you want to pay me off to accept discrimination quietly?" The words hit Kayla like a slap, her lips parting but no reply forming. Behind her, Captain Torres stiffened, sensing his authority unraveling. But before he could speak, Elizabeth laughed bitterly, folding her arms with smug satisfaction. "CEO," she said mockingly, her tone dripping disbelief. "Oh, please, anyone can say they're the CEO these days." That was the breaking point. Marcus reached into his bag, calmly pulled out his phone, and with one swipe opened the Nexus Tech CEO Override app. Jada's livestream zoomed in instinctively as Marcus tapped a command that instantly displayed across Delta's operational network, Flight 927, hold at Gate A12, CEO Override activated. Gasps erupted through the cabin as passengers whipped out their phones, notifications lighting up everywhere, and Sophia's eyes widened as she whispered under her breath. He wasn't bluffing. Elizabeth's face drained of color, her composure fracturing for the first time as she turned slowly toward Marcus, finally realizing the scale of her mistake. Kayla took a shaky breath, stepping back instinctively, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Oh my God, he really is." But Marcus didn't look at her. His gaze locked on Captain Torres instead, his voice quiet but firm, carrying a weight that silenced the entire cabin. "Captain, you will either enforce Delta's seating policies equally," he said, "or this aircraft will not leave this gate." For several seconds, no one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the rapid clicking of cameras and the relentless ping of Jada's notifications as her viewership surged past 20,000. Finally, Torres lowered his shoulders, defeated, his voice subdued as he turned to Elizabeth. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I'll need you to vacate seat 1B immediately." Elizabeth froze, her knuckles white as she clutched her handbag. But the weight of dozens of recording phones around her was too much. Slowly, reluctantly, she stood, her head held high but her eyes darting nervously, retreating into the aisle. Marcus lowered himself into seat 1B without another word, his calm composure intact even as his phone buzzed with messages from Lena Harper, Nexus Tech's COO, confirming that their communications team was already preparing a response strategy across the cabin. Sofia Alvarez kept her camera rolling, already drafting her headline in her head. Delta CEO faces discrimination on his own airline. Outside the plane, news outlets were scrambling. Inside, passengers whispered, documented, and watched history unfold in real time. Jada's live stream crossed 35,000 viewers before the wheels even left the ground, the comment section now flooded with messages demanding corporate accountability. And in that tense, breathless silence, Marcus Bennett leaned back into his seat, finally looking at Elizabeth, now relegated to 3A, and said quietly, so only she could hear, "Everyone belongs here. Remember that." For a long moment. There was only silence inside Delta Flight 927, the kind of silence so thick it felt like the entire cabin was holding its breath. And then everything erupted at once, phones buzzing, passengers whispering, Jada Carter's live stream crossing 80,000 viewers in under 2 minutes, hashtags trending at lightning speed. And yet Marcus Bennett sat perfectly still in seat 1B, his calmness louder than any raised voice. Elizabeth Warrington, now pushed back into seat 3A, gripped her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles turned pale, her arrogance collapsing under the weight of global scrutiny she never saw coming. Kayla Morgan stood frozen in the aisle, tablet clutched in both hands, staring at the CEO override notification blinking red on her screen, confirming what she had feared but refused to believe. Marcus Bennett wasn't bluffing. He was the man in charge of the airline, the man who literally had the power to ground this plane, the man whose decisions shaped the very policies she had tried to weaponize against him. Captain Daniel Torres adjusted his cap nervously, glancing back toward the cockpit where his co-pilot had just relayed an urgent message from Delta's headquarters. "Do not antagonize him. Comply immediately." The corporate chain of command had been triggered, and within minutes, an entire team in Atlanta was monitoring the confrontation in real time. Inside the cabin, Jada's live stream viewership shot past 100,000, the chat scrolling so fast it blurred into a wall of outrage and support. "Stand your ground. Marcus, exposing Delta Live. This is bigger than one seat. We see you." Sofia Alvarez, pen scratching furiously, was already thinking beyond the headline. This wasn't just a first-class seating dispute. This was about systemic bias, corporate accountability, and the viral power of social media to force institutions to change. Elizabeth, flustered but still defiant, turned halfway in her seat and hissed, low but venomous, "You're enjoying this, aren't you? You think embarrassing me makes you right?" Marcus turned his head slowly, his voice calm, steady, deliberate. "No. Mrs. Warrington," he said evenly, "this isn't about embarrassing you. This is about holding people accountable when they believe privilege gives them power over others. That ends today." His words landed like a gavel striking hardwood. Final. Unshakable. And Elizabeth flinched before turning away, hiding behind her phone as if it could shield her from the cameras capturing every angle of her downfall. Kayla shifted uncomfortably, trying one last time to salvage the situation, leaning toward Marcus, whispering softly so others couldn't hear. "Mr. Bennett." "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I didn't know who you were." Marcus met her eyes without anger, only quiet disappointment. "Kayla," he said softly, You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me with respect. The weight of that sentence hit her harder than any reprimand ever could. And for the first time. She glanced down at the floor, ashamed, in the aisle. Other passengers nodded subtly, the young black couple exchanging quiet smiles of recognition. And somewhere in the back, a man whispered, "Finally, someone's saying it." Outside the aircraft, chaos was brewing. Within 15 minutes, multiple major news networks, from CNN to MSNBC to Fox, had picked up Jada's live stream feed, embedding it into live coverage with lower thirds screaming, "CEO confronted on his own airline. Viral showdown." Delta's boardroom in Atlanta descended into panic. Executives pacing with phones glued to their ears, PR strategists drafting statements on the fly, and Rebecca Coleman, Delta's VP of Operations, dialing Lena Harper, NexusTech's COO, to confirm details. Lena, seated in NexusTech's glass-walled headquarters just 5 miles away, answered on the first ring. "Yes," she said calmly. "It's true. Marcus is on Flight 927. He has activated CEO authority. I suggest you prepare for a public apology before this escalates further." Back inside the cabin, passengers who had remained silent began pulling out their phones, recording their own angles, contributing to a mosaic of live perspectives flooding TikTok, X, YouTube, and Facebook simultaneously. Within minutes, clips had amassed over 2.3 million views combined, and the hashtag Seat1B became the #1 global trend. Marcus leaned back slightly, finally resting against the plush leather of his rightful seat, but his expression carried no satisfaction. Only focus, as he quietly messaged Lena. "Push the statement in 1 hour. Emphasize accountability. Full transparency. Elizabeth." Meanwhile, scrolled frantically through her phone, her lips tightening as she saw her name plastered across trending feeds, her wealthy friends messaging her privately with disbelief, some defending her, most abandoning her. For the first time, she realized her reputation, the carefully crafted image of power, influence, and untouchable status, was unraveling, not behind closed doors, but under the unrelenting spotlight of millions of strangers. Kayla returned to her jump seat, tears threatening behind her professional composure, replaying her choices in her mind. While Captain Torres retreated to the cockpit to await further instruction from headquarters, his authority diminished, his role reduced to compliance. Through it all, Marcus remained calm, never raising his voice, never lashing out, allowing the weight of the truth to speak louder than anger ever could. Jada's live stream soared past 150,000 concurrent viewers, with Sophia leaning over to whisper quietly to her, "Stay on him. Capture everything. This isn't just a video, it's history." Jada nodded, zooming in slightly as Marcus opened his NexusTech dashboard on his tablet, displaying an interface no one outside corporate leadership had ever seen before: real-time bias detection metrics, passenger complaint logs, and live analytics tracking discriminatory incidents across Delta's global network. Gasps erupted nearby as Marcus turned the screen slightly, showing a spike in reported bias events over the past year. "This," he said softly, almost to himself, but loud enough for Jada's mic to capture, "is why things have to change." The livestream comments exploded instantly. "What is that system? Accountability tech? He's building tools to fight this. We need this everywhere. By now." Tech journalists from Wired, Bloomberg, and Forbes were joining the stream, resharing clips, tweeting headlines, and calling NexusTech for statements. In Atlanta, Lena Harper held a private call with the board, her voice firm, decisive, razor sharp. "This is no longer an internal dispute," she said. "This is a defining moment for Delta. We either lead on anti-bias reforms, or we become the cautionary tale everyone else learns from." Meanwhile, inside the cabin, the mood shifted, Where there had been tension and fear, there was now quiet awe as passengers realized the scale of the man seated among them. Elizabeth remained silent, her face flushed, scrolling desperately but finding no lifeline. Sophia leaned back, scribbling furiously, already shaping her feature article. The day Delta changed forever. Jada, overwhelmed by thousands of messages pouring in, turned her camera briefly on herself, whispering, "You guys, this is insane. He just grounded the flight. He owns the airline." Comments exploded. Viewership ticked past 200,000, and TikTok stitched the moment across thousands of accounts simultaneously. For Marcus, though, the world outside didn't matter. Not yet. He turned his phone face down, folded his hands calmly in his lap, and finally allowed himself a single deep breath, knowing this was only the beginning. Because after today, the airline industry would never be the same. The air inside Delta Flight 927 felt charged, like static before a lightning strike, and outside the cabin, the storm had already begun. Jada Carter's live stream had crossed 5 million views in less than an hour, with clips going viral across TikTok, X, YouTube, and Facebook simultaneously, and hashtags like Delta Discrimination, Seat 1B, and Justice in the Skies dominating global trends. CNN cut into live programming with a breaking news banner reading Delta CEO confronted over alleged racial bias, viral video shocks nation, while Fox News and MSNBC followed within minutes, each replaying the clip of Elizabeth Warrington saying, "People like you don't belong in first class," over and over, the words echoing like a siren across America. Outside the plane, dozens of reporters had gathered near Gate A12 at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, tipped off by the explosion on social media, their cameras ready, microphones extended, voices overlapping as they shouted updates to producers watching anxiously in studios across the country. Inside the cabin, Marcus Bennett remained composed, seated in 1B, scrolling silently through the Nexus Tech dashboard on his tablet as live analytics displayed the unfolding chaos in real time, flight delay reports, passenger comments, trending sentiment graphs showing a 92% negative reaction toward Delta, and thousands of tagged mentions demanding change. Captain Daniel Torres received direct instructions from Delta's headquarters not to leave the gate until further notice, his authority overshadowed entirely by the presence of the man in seat 1B. Elizabeth Warrington, once poised and untouchable, sat rigidly in 3A, her hands trembling slightly as her phone buzzed relentlessly with messages from friends, lawyers, and family members warning her that her name was plastered across every news outlet in America. Kayla Morgan remained near the galley, head bowed, trying to compose herself as guilt pressed heavily against her chest, the reality sinking in that her actions, however unintentional, had played a role in igniting one of the biggest corporate crises in Delta's history. Sophia Alvarez, notebook balanced on her lap, typed furiously on her tablet, drafting the opening lines of her article for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, when a black CEO was told he didn't belong in the seat he purchased. Millions stood witness, and the airline industry stood trial, back at Delta's Atlanta headquarters. The tension was palpable. PR specialists crowded into a glass-walled war room, giant screens displaying live feeds of Jada's video, trending hashtags, and broadcast news coverage side by side. Rebecca Coleman, Delta's Vice President of Operations, paced the floor with her Bluetooth headset pressed tightly to her ear, barking orders to legal, security, and media teams simultaneously. "We need a unified statement now," she snapped, her voice sharp, commanding, her reputation for crisis management on the line. "Get me Lena Harper at Nexus Tech." Seconds later, Lena appeared on the video wall from Nexus Tech's headquarters, her face calm but serious, her voice smooth and steady as she cut straight to the point. "Rebecca," she said coldly, Marcus is my CEO, and your team tried to humiliate him on an airline he owns 70% of. You don't need a statement. You need to get in front of a camera and apologize. The weight of Lena's words stunned the Delta executives into silence, their entire board now aware that this wasn't just a PR incident. It was a potential shareholder revolt. Meanwhile, at Gate A12, airport security struggled to contain the growing crowd of reporters, passengers, and live streamers gathering outside the jet bridge. Every few seconds, new flashes lit up the terminal as photos of Marcus circulated online, labeled with captions like "The Calm CEO," "Man of Dignity," and the Seat 1B incident. Finally, Rebecca Coleman herself arrived at the jet bridge, flanked by 2 Delta security officers, her tailored navy blazer perfectly pressed, her face composed but tense. The cabin door opened, and all eyes turned as she stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the polished aisle floor, the entire first-class section watching like jurors awaiting a verdict. She stopped in front of Marcus, lowered her voice slightly, and said, "Mr. Bennett, I'm Rebecca Coleman, VP of Operations. I'd like to speak with you privately." Marcus looked up from his tablet, his expression neutral but unyielding, his voice low yet steady enough for Jada's live stream to capture every syllable. "There's nothing private about what happened here, Rebecca," he said, "and there will be nothing private about how it's resolved." Gasps whispered through the cabin as Rebecca straightened her posture, nodding once before gesturing toward the aisle. "Then let's step out together," she said carefully, "and address the press." Marcus rose slowly, his tall frame commanding the aisle, every eye following him as he walked past Elizabeth, whose gaze stayed fixed on the floor, cheeks burning with humiliation she could no longer hide. Jada's phone tracked every step, the comments erupting into chaos. "He's about to speak! Go Marcus! History being made! We're watching from London!" Outside the cabin, the jet bridge was swarming with cameras, lights, microphones, and reporters shouting overlapping questions, their voices crashing together like waves. "Mr. Bennett, are you filing a lawsuit? Will there be terminations? Is Delta facing regulatory action?" Marcus paused at the center, raised one hand slightly for silence, and the crowd hushed instantly, the weight of his presence impossible to ignore. He spoke slowly, deliberately, letting every word settle before continuing. "What happened today isn't just about one seat, or one passenger, or even one airline," he said, his deep voice resonating with controlled power. "This is about dignity. It's about the systems that allow implicit bias to operate unchecked, and it's about using technology, transparency, and accountability to change that. Starting now." Rebecca stood behind him, silent, her folded hands betraying the tension coursing through her, while Delta's corporate attorneys shifted uncomfortably in the background, knowing their policies were about to be rewritten on the spot. "As of this moment," Marcus continued, "Nexus Tech will be deploying its bias detection software across all Delta Airlines operations. Every incident, every interaction, every decision will be monitored in real time. There will be no more hidden misconduct. There will be no more silent discrimination. We are building a system where every passenger, every employee, and every customer matters. Equally." Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters scribbled frantically, and live coverage carried his words into millions of homes worldwide. Back inside the cabin, Kayla sat frozen, her chest tight with emotion, realizing Marcus wasn't here for revenge. He was here for change. Elizabeth stared at her phone. Her notifications flooded with backlash, her name trending alongside calls for a lifetime Delta ban. Sophia's eyes shimmered as she whispered under her breath, "This is history." Within 30 minutes, major shareholders were on emergency calls. Delta's stock dipped 8% in after-hours trading, and Jada's livestream surpassed 8 million viewers globally, making it the most watched aviation-related video in U.S. social media history. for Marcus. Though, the numbers didn't matter. As he stepped back toward the cabin, he knew this was only the beginning, because from this moment forward, the airline industry would either adapt or collapse under the weight of its own silence. By the time Delta Flight 927 returned to the gate, the world was already watching. Jada Carter's live stream had crossed 12 million views, and trending hashtags like Delta discrimination, Seat 1B, and Justice in the Skies dominated global feeds. News helicopters hovered above Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, their live shots broadcasting the chaos below as crowds formed outside Gate A12, holding up phones and chanting Marcus Bennett's name, inside Delta's Atlanta headquarters. The atmosphere was electric with panic. Executives gathered in a glass-walled crisis room, their phones buzzing non-stop with calls from shareholders, regulators, and furious passengers demanding answers. Rebecca Coleman, Delta's VP of Operations, sat at the head of the table, flanked by the general counsel and PR directors, her face pale but composed as she replayed Jada's viral clip for the 100th time. The moment Elizabeth Warrington's voice said, "People like you don't belong in first class," became the soundbite heard around the world, playing on CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC in an endless loop. Meanwhile, Marcus remained inside the aircraft, seated calmly in 1B, his phone lighting up with messages from Lena Harper, Nexus Tech's COO, confirming that Nexus Tech's legal division had already mobilized. "Marcus," Lena texted, "we've assembled a cross-functional task force, legal, PR, compliance. We'll control the narrative." Marcus replied with one line, "This isn't about narrative. It's about change." Outside the plane, the jet bridge became a battlefield of microphones, cameras, and flashing lights as reporters competed for angles and passengers filed out, giving live interviews to national outlets. Sofia Alvarez, her notebook now full, connected with CNN on the spot, summarizing the incident from a witness's perspective. He wasn't angry. He wasn't loud. He stood his ground with dignity, and they tried to push him out anyway, within hours. Civil rights attorneys began circling. One of them, Jamal Robinson, a prominent Atlanta-based lawyer specializing in aviation discrimination cases, released a video statement. "This isn't just about Marcus Bennett. This is about systemic bias in airline operations. We are preparing a class action lawsuit against Delta Airlines on behalf of any passenger who's faced discrimination in the last 5 years." The announcement sent shockwaves through the industry. Delta's stock dropped another 6% in after-hours trading, wiping nearly $3.4 billion from its market value overnight. While Nexus Tech's stock rose sharply as investors bet on Marcus's leadership and the adoption of his bias detection platform across the industry, at the same time, regulators took notice. By evening, the FAA, the DOT, and even the EEOC had contacted Delta for explanations, demanding copies of training policies, passenger handling procedures, and internal communications from the flight crew. Back at Nexus Tech headquarters, Lena convened an emergency board meeting on the 24th floor, with panoramic views of downtown Atlanta glowing under the night sky. Marcus stood at the head of a sleek conference table as executives joined via video from New York, London, and Singapore. "We're not here to contain this," Marcus said, his deep voice steady, measured, resolute. "We're here to lead. Starting tonight, Nexus Tech is launching the Sky Shield Initiative, an open-source anti-bias platform that Delta and any other airline can integrate immediately. No excuses, no delays." The room fell silent, then erupted into nods of agreement as Lena outlined the plan. Real-time monitoring of passenger and crew interactions, instant escalation protocols for discriminatory behavior, and mandatory retraining programs for all flight attendants, pilots, and gate staff. "Within 6 months," Lena said, We can reduce reported incidents by 85%. Meanwhile, Jada's livestream shattered another record, surpassing 20 million views globally and sparking a social movement under the hashtag #TravelJustice. Viewers shared their own stories of mistreatment while traveling, flooding platforms with videos, receipts, and personal testimonies, creating a digital archive of systemic failures within the airline industry. Influencers, celebrities, and politicians weighed in. Reverend Al Sharpton called Marcus a symbol of dignity under pressure, Oprah tweeted. Marcus Bennett stood in his power today. The industry must do better. Even the White House released a statement acknowledging the incident, with the press secretary promising that the Department of Transportation would review passenger rights protections to ensure dignity and fairness for all travelers. Inside her Buckhead mansion, Elizabeth Warrington sat alone in her marble kitchen, her phone buzzing relentlessly as calls from lawyers, friends, and family poured in. Her name had become a global trending topic, her family's real estate empire losing high-profile clients overnight, and luxury brands severing partnerships within hours, desperate to salvage her reputation. Elizabeth's legal team drafted a carefully worded apology, but Marcus publicly declined to comment on it, refusing to make the story about personal revenge. This isn't about one person, he told Lena during a late-night strategy call. It's about dismantling a broken system. Within 48 hours, Jada appeared on Good Morning America, recounting her role in exposing the incident. I didn't expect this, she said tearfully. But millions of people are watching because they've experienced this too. It's bigger than one video. Offers from media networks and speaking engagements flooded her inbox. But Marcus personally called her, advising her to stay grounded, reminding her of her journalistic integrity. Your voice is powerful, he told her. Use it wisely. Meanwhile, Kayla Morgan, the flight attendant who had sided with Elizabeth, faced suspension pending an internal review in a private meeting mediated by Nexus Tech's HR division. Kayla broke down in tears, admitting she had panicked under pressure and defaulted to keeping a Delta VIP comfortable rather than standing up for policy. Marcus listened, quiet and measured, before responding. Kayla, this isn't about destroying you, he said. It's about making sure you, and everyone else here, have the tools and training to do better. Kayla, visibly shaken but grateful, later volunteered to join the Sky Shield initiative, becoming one of its earliest advocates. Meanwhile, Sofia Alvarez's front-page article, titled The Seat 1B Revolt, How One Flight Sparked an Industry Reckoning, went live across national syndicates, reaching over 10 million readers in 24 hours. The article highlighted not just Marcus's calm response, but the structural failures within Delta's culture that allowed the incident to escalate in the first place. Sophia concluded powerfully, Marcus Bennett didn't just reclaim his seat, he reclaimed a conversation America has avoided for far too long, within a week. Over 40 airlines worldwide contacted Nexus Tech expressing interest in adopting the Sky Shield platform. Delta, under immense shareholder pressure, announced a $250 million anti-bias fund to implement reforms, retrain staff, and compensate impacted passengers. But public trust continued to waver. By then, Jada's video had passed 35 million views, cementing itself as the most watched aviation incident in social media history. But for Marcus, this was only the opening battle. Late one night, seated in his office overlooking the Atlanta skyline, he stared at his tablet displaying industry-wide reports of complaints and lawsuits, whispering quietly to himself, "This isn't the end. This is the beginning." 1 year later, the events of Delta Flight 927 had reshaped the airline industry forever, and the world was still talking about the day Marcus Bennett refused to give up his seat. What began as a single confrontation in a first-class cabin had evolved into a global movement for dignity, equality, and accountability in air travel. The Sky Shield initiative, launched by Nexus Tech within days of the incident, had become the industry's gold standard, integrated across over 60 international airlines and operating in 87 countries, monitoring millions of passenger interactions every month with real-time bias detection powered by Nexus Tech's proprietary AI systems. Since its launch, reports of discriminatory incidents had dropped by 92% worldwide, a transformation so rapid that the International Air Transport Association called it the single most significant reform in modern aviation history. For Marcus, the journey had been relentless. He spent the first year traveling across continents, meeting with CEOs, regulators, and advocacy groups, convincing an industry notorious for bureaucracy to embrace radical transparency. Some airlines resisted at first, fearing public exposure, but when governments began tying compliance with Sky Shield to international safety certifications, adoption skyrocketed. Governments from the United States to Japan, Germany, South Africa, and Brazil mandated its integration, framing it not just as a corporate tool but as a human rights measure. The system worked by using encrypted, anonymous monitoring of crew and passenger interactions, flagging potential bias patterns instantly, escalating complaints to oversight teams in real time, and generating monthly public transparency reports. For passengers, it meant protection. For employees, it meant accountability. And for Marcus, it meant proof that technology could dismantle systems of inequality without sacrificing dignity. The cultural shift was seismic. Airlines retrained hundreds of thousands of staff under new anti-bias protocols, introducing immersive VR simulations where crew members experienced scenarios from the perspectives of passengers of different races, religions, genders, and abilities. The results were staggering. Empathy scores and employee training assessments jumped 74% in a single year, and customer satisfaction rates across participating airlines surged to historic highs. Jada Carter, the college student whose live stream sparked the revolution, had transformed her unexpected viral fame into purpose, guided personally by Marcus. She graduated from Morehouse College with honors and launched Altitude Media, an independent investigative platform focusing on corporate accountability and consumer rights. Her first docuseries, The Seat 1B Effect, chronicled the events of Flight 927 and its aftermath, premiering on Netflix to over 85 million global viewers and winning a Peabody Award for excellence in storytelling in one emotional episode. Jada interviewed Marcus in his Atlanta office, where he revealed something the public had never known. "I wasn't fighting for myself that day," he said quietly, his voice cracking slightly. "I was thinking about Amara, my daughter, and the world I want her to inherit. No one should have to prove they belong." That clip alone garnered over 200 million views, becoming the defining soundbite of the movement. Kayla Morgan, the flight attendant who had initially sided with Elizabeth Warrington, also became a pivotal figure in this transformation. After undergoing intensive training and speaking publicly about her mistakes, she was promoted to Director of Inclusion Training at Delta Airlines, designing modules used by over 300,000 employees worldwide. Her TED Talk, titled "I Chose Policy Over People and How I Learned to Lead with Empathy," went viral, turning her into one of the most sought-after speakers on cultural sensitivity in the travel industry. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Warrington, the woman whose words started it all, faded into near-complete obscurity. Her family's real estate empire was dismantled piece by piece under the weight of public backlash, lawsuits, and severed partnerships. Despite releasing multiple public apologies and donating millions to diversity initiatives, she largely retreated from public life, living quietly under the radar. Marcus, however, was far from quiet. In 2024, he was invited to deliver the keynote address at the United Nations Human Rights and Technology Summit in Geneva, where delegates from 193 member nations gathered to discuss systemic equity in a digital age, standing beneath the UN emblem. His deep voice carried across the grand hall as he declared, Technology is not neutral. It reflects the biases of those who build it. Unless we choose differently. Sky Shield proved that with accountability. We can dismantle injustice at scale. We can code fairness into the systems that govern our lives. His speech drew a standing ovation and was broadcast live to over 350 million viewers worldwide, cementing his status not just as a tech innovator but as a global leader for civil rights in the digital era. Meanwhile, Nexus Tech itself had grown into a $480 billion juggernaut, supplying Sky Shield integrations to airlines, cruise lines, hospitality chains, and government agencies, fundamentally transforming how industries approach consumer rights. Marcus turned down multiple offers to sell the technology, insisting it remain partially open source, ensuring global accessibility rather than corporate exclusivity. Justice, he said repeatedly, cannot be paywalled, back home in Oakland. Amara Bennett had watched her father become a symbol of dignity and progress. But to Marcus, she remained his compass, in a rare personal moment. During an interview with Time magazine after being named Person of the Year 2024, he said softly, "When I sat in seat 1B, I wasn't thinking about headlines, lawsuits, or shareholder value. I was thinking about her, about the world she deserves." That authenticity, his refusal to exploit his role for personal gain, became central to why the movement endured beyond its viral origin. By the end of 2024, international regulators reported a 92% decline in passenger discrimination complaints across integrated carriers. Airports redesigned signage and customer service protocols to emphasize inclusivity, while Nexus Tech collaborated with global universities to publish the Equity Index, an annual benchmark ranking airlines on transparency, fairness, and customer dignity. The U.S. Department of Transportation credited Marcus personally for redefining global standards of equity in commercial travel. Yet Marcus stayed cautious, often reminding his team during internal meetings, "Change isn't permanent. Systems revert if we stop paying attention." And so Nexus Tech continued iterating, expanding Sky Shield into predictive analytics capable of flagging potential bias before it even reached passengers. Other industries began knocking on Nexus Tech's door, from hospitals seeking to reduce racial disparities in patient care, to banks aiming to eliminate bias in loan approvals, to universities confronting inequities in admissions processes. What started with one airline seat had evolved into a multi-sector accountability revolution, reshaping expectations in nearly every corner of society. Despite the global attention, Marcus avoided the trappings of celebrity, living quietly in Atlanta when he wasn't traveling, still personally replying to letters from passengers who credited Sky Shield with restoring their trust in flying. One letter, handwritten by a grandmother from Kansas, sat framed on his desk. It read simply, "Because of you, I stopped being afraid to fly. Thank you for seeing us." On certain nights, when the weight of the movement pressed too heavily, Marcus would stand on his balcony overlooking the city lights and think back to that single moment on Flight 927. The tension, the humiliation, the choice he had to make. And he'd whisper to himself, "Never again." 1 year later, the gates at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport looked the same. But everything had changed. Marcus Bennett walked calmly through Concourse A, his Nexus Tech-issued leather bag resting casually on his shoulder, the hum of travelers around him blending into a quiet rhythm. Yet inside him, there was a gravity to this moment that no one else could feel. Today, he was boarding Delta Flight 927 again. The same flight, the same route, the same gate, the same seat that had sparked a movement and transformed an entire industry. Gate A12 gleamed brighter than he remembered, now redesigned with glass walls, interactive displays, and dignity and travel banners lining the entrance. A campaign born from that day. Marcus paused briefly, reading the words printed in bold beneath the logo, "Every passenger, every flight, equal respect." A soft smile tugged at the corner of his lips as memories flooded back. But there was no bitterness now, only pride in what had been built from that chaos. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, several Delta employees greeted him warmly, their faces lit with genuine gratitude. One young gate agent, no older than 25, extended her hand nervously and said, "Mr. Bennett, I just want you to know, because of you, my mother finally feels safe to fly again." Marcus shook her hand gently, replying with a quiet, "That's why we did this." Before moving forward, inside the first-class cabin, passengers settled into wide leather seats, soft ambient lighting casting a warm glow. But what caught Marcus's attention was the digital display above the bulkhead, showcasing a simple message in bold, calming letters, powered by Sky Shield, ensuring dignity for all. He stopped briefly, exhaling slowly, feeling the weight of 2 years press against him and then release all at once. Seat 1B waited for him, empty, polished, welcoming, as if holding the memory of what had begun there. Marcus placed his bag overhead, lowered himself into the seat, and for a moment closed his eyes, letting the soft hum of the engines wash over him. But the silence didn't last long. A young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, stood in the aisle beside her father just across from him. Her tiny hand clutched a tablet displaying the Sky Shield logo, and her eyes, wide with curiosity, met his. "Daddy," she whispered loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "What's Sky Shield?" Her father leaned down, smiling softly, and said, "That, sweetheart, is why everyone here belongs." Marcus opened his eyes at those words, his chest tightening unexpectedly, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that change wasn't just policy. It was personal, around him. The cabin had transformed in ways he once only dreamed of. Flight attendants now wore Sky Shield pins on their lapels, a quiet reminder of their role in protecting passenger dignity. Training protocols had reshaped the crew's approach entirely, as Kayla Morgan, now Delta's Director of Inclusion Training, had written in her handbook. Every interaction is an opportunity to honor someone's humanity. Marcus had seen the data himself. Complaints of bias across all Sky Shield integrated airlines had dropped by 92% globally, but numbers alone couldn't capture what he saw here: relief, comfort, safety. As boarding finished, the captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and warm. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Delta Flight 927 to San Francisco. Today marks our 2nd anniversary under the Sky Shield initiative, and we want to thank each of you for being part of a new chapter in aviation history, where every passenger, on every flight, matters." A quiet wave of applause swept through the cabin, brief but sincere, and Marcus sat back, letting the sound settle deep inside him. Across the aisle, Sofia Alvarez, now an award-winning journalist, noticed him and leaned slightly over, whispering, "You know they still call it the Seat 1B moment, right?" He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I didn't do this for a headline," he said, voice low but firm. "I did this so no one else would have to." Sophia smiled knowingly, her pen already tapping against her notebook. Even now, history was still writing itself, as the engines roared to life. Marcus glanced down at his tablet, skimming a live Nexus Tech dashboard showing Sky Shield's expansion beyond aviation, hospitals using it to monitor patient care, banks integrating it to track fair lending practices, universities adopting it for equitable admissions. What began in this seat had become a multi-industry movement redefining accountability on a global scale. But despite all the accolades, Marcus remained grounded. He thought of Amara, now 18, preparing for college, her voice echoing in his head from a recent call. "Daddy, I'm proud of you." Those words meant more to him than any headline. Stock valuation, or UN standing ovation. As the plane began its slow pushback from the gate, the same gate where this entire story began. Marcus glanced to his left and noticed something small but deeply symbolic, a framed plaque near the galley, engraved with 5 simple words: "Everyone belongs in this seat." He stared at it for a long moment, his breath catching slightly, realizing it wasn't just about him anymore, and it never really had been. From the corner of his eye, he caught Kayla entering the cabin, walking confidently in her crisp navy blazer, her Sky Shield badge catching the soft glow of the lights. She approached Marcus with a smile, calm and genuine, a far cry from the nervous flight attendant he remembered from 2 years ago. "Mr. Bennett," she said warmly, "welcome back. I want you to know, we've trained over 300,000 crew members since that day, and we're still learning, every single one of us." Marcus nodded once, his voice low but full of quiet pride. "That's the work. Kayla, that's the legacy." A few rows back, Jada Carter, now the founder of Altitude Media and one of the most respected investigative journalists of her generation, raised her phone discreetly and captured the moment, sending it live to her followers with the caption, "1 year later, Seat 1B is where change began." Within minutes, the post began trending worldwide, racking up 4 million views before takeoff, proof that the movement hadn't lost momentum. It had become part of the cultural fabric. As the aircraft lifted gently off the runway, Marcus glanced out the window at the Atlanta skyline glowing beneath him, the city where it all started, where one decision, one refusal to be diminished, sparked something far bigger than he ever imagined. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, the steady hum of the engines blending with his thoughts. And in that quiet, he reflected on the simplest truth he'd learned through it all. Real change doesn't start in boardrooms or courtrooms. It starts in moments, choices, and voices willing to be heard. 2 rows ahead, the little girl with the tablet whispered again, this time to herself, "Everyone belongs here." And Marcus smiled softly, letting the words carry him forward. As the plane climbed above the clouds, Delta's new motto illuminated softly on the cabin wall in elegant silver lettering: "Dignity in travel, justice in motion." For Marcus, it wasn't just a slogan, it was a promise. And this time, for the first time in decades, he believed it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next story.